Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our online discussion. We have a very precious guest, Professor Nadhir Al-Ansari. Welcome, Professor Al-Ansari.
Thank you.
First, I would like to introduce Professor Nadhir Al-Ansari briefly. Actually, I found many CVs of you in the internet, and one of them was 744 pages. You have a very great academic career, but I will summarize your CV shortly. Professor Al-Ansari is a professor at the Department of Civil, Environmental and Natural Resources Engineering at Luleå Technical University, Sweden. Research interests are mainly in water resources and environment. Served several academic administrative posts, Dean, Head of Department. Publications include more than 640 articles in international, national journals, chapters in books, and 18 books and special issues. He executed more than 60 major research projects in Iraq, Jordan, and England, awarded several scientific and educational awards. Among them is the British Council on its 70th anniversary, awarded him top 5 scientist in cultural relations, one patent on physical methods for the separation of iron oxides, supervised more than 70 postgraduate students at different universities, member of several scientific societies like International Association of Hydrological Sciences, Chartered Institution of Water and Environment Management, established and president till 1995 of the Iraqi Water Resources Society, a member of the editorial board of 24 international journals. I am very pleased to have this interview with you, Professor Al-Ansari. He will speak about water resources problems of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. If there will be time at the end of the presentation, I would like to ask some questions. Now I am going to turn the microphone over our guest.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today I'm going to talk about water resources problems of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. When I talk about Tigris and Euphrates, it's better to have a good idea about how much water is available on the planet Earth and why there is a shortage of water resources. In fact, the quantity of water available on the Earth, it's about 1.4 billion cubic kilometers. And this is a lot amount of water. But if we look at the details of this water, then we can see that 97% of this water is saline water because it's sea and ocean water, which cannot be used. And the remainder, 3%, most of it, 77%, is in the form of ice at the North and Southern Pole, and then 22% as groundwater. So when we look at the usable water available in rivers, it doesn't exceed 0.003%. And that's why the quantity is too small and there is shortage of water always. And then we can look at the river catchments, and there are always more than one country sharing these rivers. And more than 60% of the river basins in the world are shared. And you can see the number of shared catchments in different continents. For example, in Europe, 48 catchments, in Asia, 40, in Africa, 57, and in America, there are 35 different catchments of rivers. And for more information, 80 countries of the third world that support about 40% of the world's population we can see the problems in these countries. 1.2 billion people, they suffer from physical problems, and 1.8 billion, they lack adequate sanitation. And in the third world, 80% of the illness is due to bad water quality, and 30% of unnatural death is due to pollution of water. So for this reason, there is always some sort of tension and friction about water resources or usable water resources. And for this reason, there are 300 signed treaties which arrange the communication and sharing of water resources between different countries. And there are more than 3,000 treaties that have articles to arrange the use of water sharing between different countries. And in each river catchment, which is, let's say, joined, or there are more than one country sharing that catchment, there is always a dominant country in such catchments. And if we are talking about the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, the dominant country in this case is Turkey. And according to the figures I gave you and the research done by different researchers and UN reports, the future expectations is that 37 countries in 2025 will suffer from shortage of water resources. And now we come to the Middle East. And if we look at the Middle East is considered as an arid to semi-arid area. Why? Because the long-term rainfall, average rainfall precipitation in this area doesn't exceed 166 millimeters per year. So this area is very sensitive to climate change. And if we look at the Tigris and Euphrates basin, you can see that it's located in the northeastern part of the Middle East or Arabian Peninsula, and Iraq is bounded by Turkey from the north, Iran from the east, Syria and Jordan from the west, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the Gulf from the south. Now we come to a closer look to the catchment of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And this catchment is shared by 5 countries. And you can see the countries involved in this table. And we are concerned mainly with Turkey and Iran. Why? Because the river Tigris and Euphrates, they rise from Turkey, and some of the tributaries of the Tigris, they rise from Iran. That's why these 2 countries are very important in our discussions. And if we look at the water coming to Iraq, in fact, most of the water is coming from Turkey. 71% of the water entering Iraq comes from Turkey, and then followed by Iran, and then Syria, and there is a small portion generated within Iraq. And if we look at how much water is coming, long-term average, coming to Iraq, in fact, the Tigris River usually supplies Iraq with 21.2 billion cubic meters, while the Euphrates River supplies Iraq with 30 billion cubic meters. And the tributaries of the Tigris, they supply 24.78 billion cubic meters to Iraq. And there are what's called, let's say, side small valleys from Iran entering Iraq. They supply at least 7 billion cubic meters. And if we look at the water consumption in Iraq, we'll notice that Iraq consumes about 42 to 43 billion cubic meters. Most of this, in fact, is consumed for agricultural purposes, 92%, and then 3% for domestic purposes, and the remainder 5% is for industrial purposes. These are long-term average figures. And now, if we come to what's happening or what's going on now, recently after 2001, let's say, we'll see that the flow of the Tigris River is reduced very much with time. And from the slide you are looking at, in fact, you can notice that the discharge of the Tigris River and its tributaries at Baghdad station used to be about 1,207 cubic meters per second, while now it's only 522 cubic meters per second. And you can see the decrease or continuous decrease with time from the curve in front of you, and the least line, dotted black line at the bottom of the curve, it represents the discharge of the Tigris River and its tributaries nowadays. If we look at the Euphrates River, then the situation is worse than the Tigris. In fact, as I said about a few minutes ago, the overall long-term supply average of the Euphrates is 30 billion cubic meters. And this, of course, varies, excuse me, from 10 to 40 billion cubic meters according to dry and wet year. But the overall average is 30 billion. But nowadays, Iraq gets only 4.4 billion cubic meters of the Euphrates water. So you can see the high reduction in the water coming to Iraq. According to these reductions, then a drought has increased, and what was used to be called the Fertile Crescent, it started to die about 32 years ago, and drought is spreading within the area of Iraq. And now, if we look closer to the conflict or tension between riparian countries within the Tigris and Euphrates catchments, then we can talk about several variables causing this conflict. One of them is availability of water, and always Turkey, it claims that Iraq has a good share of water per capita, according to the table in front of you. And this might be true, but this was in the past. And always Turkey, they claim that Iraq, they have enough water from the Tigris and Euphrates, but there is mismanagement of water resources inside Iraq causing water shortage problem. Maybe this was true in the past, but as far as the new figures of discharge of the Tigris and Euphrates, they are going down, as I said a few minutes ago, and you can look at the curve here in front of you, and the red lines represent the present discharge of the two rivers, and you can see how much excuse me, decrease has taken place within the discharge of these two rivers. So what Turkey is claiming now is not correct, really. And then the consequences of this, we'll have more evaporation and more drought. And UN, or one of the UN reports, which was released in 2010, it says that if the situation remains like this, and if Turkey and Iran executed all their research hydrological projects, then no water will be available in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers by the year 2040. And now we come to another factor, which is climatic change and hydrological project. And according to what's going on as far as climate change, we can notice from all the models and the research done on the Middle East, it indicates that there will be a reduction in precipitation between about 15 to 25%. And as a consequence, the discharge of the rivers will be reduced between 29 to 73%. And of course, another consequence will be grave depletion of groundwater resources within the area. And if all this happens, this will affect all aspects of life within the area. And in addition to what I said just now, there will be more dust storms. And dust storms, in fact, will affect the environment and the humans within the area. And one of the reports released by one of the UN organizations about 5 years ago, it talks about how much dust storms or dusty days are visible in Iraq. And it says one of the years, the dusty days were about 280 days per 1 year. So you can imagine the effect of dust on the environment and humans in the area. The other consequence of climate change is the rise of sea level. And in this case, we are talking about the Gulf. And if the situation remains like this and the water level in the Gulf increased with time, then it will cover the whole southern of Iraq, and it might reach even the middle parts, southern, the capital, Baghdad. A third consequence of climate change, in fact, despite the fact that I said there is a decrease in precipitation and let's say river discharge, there will be years, excuse me, there will be years where there will be intensive rainfall in short duration of time. And this is very dangerous because it will release, let's say, big floods. And this happened about 2 years ago in Iraq, and hundreds of square kilometers of irrigation or agricultural land were destroyed, in addition to small villages also were destroyed. So these are the consequences of climate change. And now we come to the effect of hydrological projects in the upper parts of the Tigris and Euphrates catchments. Syria, in fact, they built 4 dams, and now there is nothing going on in Syria, and you can notice that from the security situation going on in Syria for the past few years. But if you look at what Iran has done, they have built about 12 dams, and in addition to this, they diverted plenty of the tributaries of the Tigris, like Karun River, and this caused a decrease by 50% of the discharge of Shatt al-Arab River, which forms from joining of the 2 rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, in the southern part of Iraq. And in addition to this, they not only diverted the flow of Karun River, in fact, they are throwing wastewater through the valley of that river and causing pollution in Shatt al-Arab. And again, due to the reduction of discharge of Shatt al-Arab, the water from the Gulf, which is very saline, it's going up and covering land which didn't do before, and this is causing pollution of the water and the soil in these areas. And a few, let's say, months ago, the Iraqi Ministry of Water Resources, they released a report, and that report says that Iran, they have reduced the water discharge of two of the main tributaries of the Tigress to a very small amount, about 2 cubic meters per second on one of them, and the other one only 7 cubic meters per second. And this also highly affects the human population within the catchment of these two tributaries, and of course, the agricultural activities within these two tributaries. And in addition to all this, all the side valleys that I was talking about, which contributes about 7 billion cubic meters of water to Iraq, the Iranians, they have closed all these valleys and diverted the water to inside Iran. And if we come to Turkey, they have very ambitious project, which is called the GAP project. It's located southeast Turkey, and it's supposed to contain 22 dams and, in fact, about 19 hydroelectric power stations. And it should irrigate a large area in southeast Turkey. And if we look at the total storage capacity of this GAP project, it's about 100 billion cubic meters. And if we look at the, let's say, details of the hydrological projects in Turkey, the overall storage capacity, if the GAP project is completed, it will be about more than 190 billion cubic meters. And if we look at how much really water is consumed in Turkey, it is less than 20 billion cubic meters. For this reason, plenty of researchers, they think that what's going on about the GAP projects and other projects in Turkey, it's not only for irrigation purposes. In fact, there are other goals. And some of the researchers, they say that since the storage capacity of these projects is very high, then Turkey would like to trade the excess water with neighboring countries that are suffering from shortage of water. And other researchers, they claim that this GAP project also, one of its goals is to change the demography of the area, because most of the opposition, let's say, toward the central government, they are populated in this area, and by implementing these huge projects, then there are plenty of villages and towns will be flooded with water, and the residents, they have to change places, and thus this will change the demography of the area. The third variable or factor of friction and tension is population growth rate. And if we look at the population growth rate within the countries in the Tigris and Euphrates basin, it's very high according to this table, and the highest is in Syria, followed by Iraq and other countries. And the population nowadays, it's about 222 million people within the Tigris and Euphrates basins. And it's expected to increase to by about 80 million in the year 2050. And this means more demand for water to for the increase of population, and we have to, of course, there should be available agricultural products for feeding this increase in population. And if we look at the consumption of this water within these riparian countries, we will see that most of the water is consumed for agricultural purposes. And as an average, in fact, about 84% of the water consumption within the riparian countries, it goes for agricultural purposes, and only 8.4 for domestic or municipal purposes, and 7.3% for industrial purposes. In fact, Syria tried to use new methods of irrigation so that it can reduce the consumption of water for agricultural purposes. But what happened, in fact, the farmers and the engineers didn't know how to use the new techniques, and there was a reduction in the agricultural project for by about 50%, and plenty of the farmers joined opposition, let's say, groups, because they wanted to survive. Iraq, of course, tried also to reclaim plenty of the land, but due to the situation after the UN sanctions on Iraq and the Gulf War, first and second Gulf War, and the security situation in Iraq, in fact, water resources and land reclamation became a minor issue due to the importance of security issues. And then there is another factor, which is the energy requirement. And if we look at all the countries within the Tigris and Euphrates basin, we'll see that all of them, they have oil and gas resources apart from Turkey. So Turkey is very desperate, in fact, to get energy resource. And you can see the conflict and survey in the Eastern Mediterranean between, for example, these days, between Greece and Turkey about finding new oil reserves. And one of the goals of the GAP project in Turkey is to generate 40% of the energy required for the country. And if they do so, then they will reduce their import for oil by 28 million tons per year. And this, of course, affects the Turkish budget a lot. And then the other factor, or the fifth factor for tension, is water management. In fact, water management is very bad in all the countries within the Tigris and Euphrates basin. And this can be noticed from the irrigation technique they are using. All of them, they use flood irrigation mainly since the Sumerian time, 6,000 years ago. And they didn't change this. And according to the climate change and ongoing temperatures, in fact, using flood irrigation is very bad, because there will be plenty of losses by, excuse me, by evaporation and infiltration. In addition to this, there are extensive use of fertilizers, and this caused, of course, very bad water quality. And in fact, one of the UN reports, which was released by IOM about a few months ago, talking about the water quality in Iraq, it says that the quality of water is very bad in the southern and middle parts of Iraq, and it reaches in some places more than 8,500 ppm. And the maximum allowable limit for use is 1,200 ppm. And in Basra, southern Iraq, it's about 20,000 or more ppm, the salinity of water. And this caused thousands of people to leave their towns and homes and to move to other places due to very bad water quality and shortage of water resources. And then we come to economic development. And as I said a few minutes ago, all the countries apart from Turkey, they have water resource, oil resources and gas resources. And if we look at the past 2 decades, in fact, the oil and gas prices were going up, and this caused high economic development in all the countries concerned. And this caused, as a consequence, 50% of the people living in rural places to move to big towns. And moving of people from rural country to a big town will increase the consumption per capita by 10 to 12 folds. And that means there will be more demand for water for such people moving from rural countries to big towns. The other factor is technological development, and mainly Turkey and Iran, they initiated or established, let's say, companies to construct dams, and they have constructed several dams. And construction of dams causes also losses of water. Why losses of water? Because when you build a dam, you will initiate a reservoir. And of course, having a reservoir, you will lose plenty of water by evaporation. And the existing dams, in fact, they cause a loss of evaporation, water evaporation for about 7 to 10 billion cubic meters per year from these reservoirs. And the other point is political fragmentation. And if we look at the recent history, in fact, the area was ruled by one power, the Ottoman Empire before, and then later on after World War I by French and British, and there was no problem. And then after World War I, then political borders were designated or established between countries within the region. And in this case, all the countries try to attain self-sufficiency with water. And this caused plenty of friction and tension and wars within the area. And we can give good examples about this. For example, Drake, 2007, he said the 1967 and 1973 wars were between Israel and Arab countries were mainly due to water shortage problems, also occupation of southern Lebanon in 1982 were due to diversion of valleys to Israel, and then the friction between Syria and Iraq in 1974, also it was about water resources, and friction between Turkey and Syria in 1987, it was about water resources. First Gulf War between Iraq and Iran was about the rights of Iraq and Shatt al-Arab waters. And for this reason, the UN Secretary General in the 80s, Boutros Ghali, he said the next big war that will take place in the Near East will be not political, but it will be about water shortage problems. And then another factor controls tension is the absence of any law that can regulate sharing water. And the existing international law, which was released in July 1997 by the UN, in fact, 3 countries voted against this law. One of them is Turkey, China, and Burundi. And even that law, it doesn't have any abiding, let's say, points to share water between riparian countries. It might be good for, let's say, humid countries, but this law doesn't work for arid and semi-arid countries like the situation in the Middle East. And then the last factor that causes tension and friction is public awareness. And if we look at all the riparian countries involved in the Tigris and Euphrates basin, they don't have any public awareness programs that tells the people how precious water is and how to consume water. And even decision political decision makers, they don't know the consequences of their decisions on the water resources available within the area. And if this continues to go on, then researchers predict that within the year 2040, Iraq will suffer from water shortage problems that can equal to 20.6 billion cubic meters. Now, having talked or discussed about the variables that causes water shortage problems and tension within the area, how can we resolve this problem? So solutions to this problem, as far as I can think about it, from the Iraqi side, let's say, in fact, Iraq, they have to reach an agreement with riparian countries, especially Turkey and Iran. And in fact, Iraq, they have tried to do so the past 50 years, but they have never reached to an agreement with either Turkey or Iran. So I think the negotiation and agreement should be comprehensive. And what I mean by comprehensive, it should include security, economic, trade, and all other issues, including water. Otherwise, Turkey and Iran, they will not be interested in discussing water issues only. Why I am suggesting this? Because, in fact, there are plenty of opposition parties for Turkey and Iran inside Iraq, and this highly affects the security of these two countries. So they want to maintain the security in their country, so they have to discuss this with Iraqi officials so that they reach an agreement how to solve this problem. Plus, Iraq, in fact, imports billions of dollars of goods from Turkey and Iran. And this is important for the economy of these two countries. Plus, there are hundreds of companies from Turkey and Iran. They are working inside Iraq, and also this affects the economy of these two countries. So if these negotiations were integrating all these aspects, then I think it will succeed. And to ensure the implementation of these or such agreements, there should be a third party involved, which can guarantee the implementation on ongoing the agreement to be signed. And this third party should fulfill certain requirements. And one of these requirements, it should have very high influential political level on political level, yes, on international level. And it should have very high economic and technical capabilities so that it can give loans and technical help to the parties involved in the discussions of the agreement. And this will keep all the parties gaining, or they think they have gained from this agreement, because they are going to implement the projects they are going, or they think they want them for their countries. And if we think of such a third party that can guarantee the implementation of the agreement, I can think of the United States of America or the European Union, and maybe the World Bank can do this as well, because they fulfill the requirements of such a guarantor. And then on national level, whether Iraq reached an agreement with Turkey and Iran or not, they have to do some sort of a very long-term strategy. And this strategy, in fact, should be implemented irrespective of who is governing Iraq or who is the Minister of Water Resources there, because this has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with the security and survival of the population of Iraq. So this should be implemented irrespective of who is governing Iraq. And this strategy should include rehabilitation of the infrastructures of all hydrological projects which were neglected since 1991, when the UN they implied the sanctions on Iraq. And after that, after 2003, in fact, water projects were not priority of the governments. Same thing goes for the efficiency of diversions and supplies, because they need rehabilitation as well. The other thing they should include in their minds is the use of non-conventional water resources. And I mean by non-conventional water resources is to use water harvesting. And we have used or tried to use water harvesting or investigated the possibilities of water harvesting in different places in Iraq. And despite the fact that rain is decreasing with time, but still we can harvest millions of cubic meters by rainwater harvesting. And the other source is wastewater treatment and reuse. In fact, the treatment of wastewater is not that difficult and not expensive, and wastewater can be collected and treated and can be used for agricultural purposes. The other thing that the Iraqi should do is to change the method of irrigation, and they should use less water losses methods. They should abandon flood irrigation and use drip and sprinkler irrigation. And the other thing, they have to put some sort of a public awareness program so that people, they know what's the value of water to be consumed. Then they have to define, let's say, an agenda, human resources development agenda for training of engineers and farmers for using the new techniques. Otherwise, they'll have the same problem that happened in Syria. So all engineers and farmers are to be educated how to use new, for example, irrigation techniques. And then there should be some sort of a data bank that includes all the information about water resources, land reclamation, and agriculture, which should be available for researchers and decision makers so that they can use them and take the right decision, or as far as researchers are concerned, they can do good research that can develop water resources within Iraq. Thank you for listening, and I'm ready and will be happy to answer any questions you would like to ask. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Professor Al-Ansari. That was a very informative presentation. I would ask a question which is related to Iran water policy. There have been claims such as the water flowing from Iran to Iraq has been completely cut off during certain periods. In some cases, harmful waters have been diverted to Iraq, and similarly, Iran has prevented the construction of dams on Shatt al-Arab.
Yeah.
Is it true? No?
In fact, to tell you the truth and be very frank, in fact, Turkey and Iran, the situation now, the present situation, they are much stronger than Iraq on political level, economic level, and security level, and military level. And they are, I think, maybe I am wrong, but I think they are taking the advantage of the weakness of the situation of Iraq these years, and they are doing what they want to do without any permission or discussion with the Iraqi, let's say, regime. And this in fact is very bad, and it's affecting the situation in Iraq. Maybe it's not that much these days, but I think within few years, there will be a big problem in Iraq, a water shortage problem in Iraq. And that's why, in fact, for the past 12 years, I was writing and publishing articles and talking in conferences that Iraq should take urgent steps toward this situation, either by discussions or negotiations with Turkey and Iran. And as I said a few minutes ago, they have to change drastically water management strategies in Iraq so that they can overcome the expected problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, it could have been better, surely, if these countries, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, agree with a common consensus. But could Iraq follow the technological development to solve his water problems since 2003, for example? We know since 2003, Iraq has political troubles and military troubles.
Yeah. As I said, whether they reach an agreement or not, they have to do a drastic change in water management policies. And I have put the outlines of such policies, in fact. And to tell you the truth, I have talked to some of the Iraqi water resources ministers after 2003, and we hand them a report about what to do, what should be done, and we held conferences telling them what to do, but nobody cares. Why? I don't know. Maybe this is what's called corruption, in fact. And everybody can notice this. And always I give an example about the corruption, ongoing corruption in Iraq. And I tell them, look at the news media and see how much the Iraqi governments since 2003 till now, how much they have spent to restore electricity in Iraq. And you will see imaginary figures, billions of dollars spent to restore electricity. Until now, there is no good electricity supply in Iraq. There are plenty of cuts. And if you look at how much billions of dollars they have spent, you can, in fact, electrify all the countries in Africa or Europe. And this is what's called corruption. And the same thing is going on in the water sector because it's same regime, same people, same goals, same ideas. And if this continues, then Iraq will face a very, very, very hard problem in the future.
And nobody is willing to solve these problems, isn't it? Because it will also affect the political.
Well, people, they are trying to do things, and maybe you have heard on the news the past, let's say, 3 years, there were demonstrations going on in different towns of Iraq, especially Baghdad, and even plenty of people were assassinated in these demonstrations, and still people are demonstrating. This is what they can do because they don't have arms, and there are plenty of, let's say, militias. They are killing them, and they are forcing them not to go out. But what can people do? They can just demonstrate, and that's it. But we hopefully, I hope anyway, that the new elections will bring a good government, sincere government, that there will be no corruption. If there are sincere people and corrupt people, every single problem can be solved. But when you have people, corrupt people, no matter what the problem is simple, there will be no solution, because corrupt people, they have other goals. Their goal is to collect as much money in the shortest possible time, not to serve the country or people. But sincere and corrupt people, this is different. They come to serve the people, not to gain money. So that is what I think.
Do you have hope that Mustafa Kazemi can do anything?
To start with, the Kazemi cabinet is for 1 year. And 1 year, you can't do that much. There are, as I said, plenty of complex problems and plenty of parties involved. And all the parties involved, they are corrupt. And of course, they will oppose anybody who would like to do the correct thing. But the Kazemi, at least he has the support of the street, because people, they don't like what's going on. But nevertheless, as I said, Kazemi is in a very difficult situation, and time-wise, it's very short. But I hope within the coming few months, the next election will bring some sincere people that can serve the country. And in such a case, they can do a lot, because the parliament will be changed, hopefully. And then the members of parliament, I hope they will be sincere and corrupt people. And when you have the parliament and the government sincere people, then you can do what the people want to do.
Thank you so much, Professor Al-Ansari. It seems we will see maybe in the future war for water, because the problem is rising more and more in these countries. Thank you so much again. That was a very informative presentation. I hope we will have the opportunity to meet on another interview in the near future. Thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I am sure that we'll meet again, and I'll be glad to cooperate with you again. Thank you very much.